Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everybody. This is a very special day, a very special Grand Rounds, the first in our series of postdoctoral fellows alumni Grand Rounds. But before going there, I have to introduce myself because you expect to see Bob Remien here. Bob Remien is in another meeting. He will join us in a minute. But he asked me to open the session. And well, it's a delight to do that as the director of our postdoctoral training program and having been intimately involved with both speakers today. But before I introduce the speakers, let's do the announcement first. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, so as I said, this is the first Grand Rounds in the series of our postdoctoral fellows alumni. And all the participants here in this session should have received this announcement for the other rounds that are scheduled throughout the year. Every other 2 months, we have 2 former postdocs come and talk. And we will continue that tradition. It's going to be a tradition in the next academic year as well. So today it's Brian Dodge and Rogerio Pinto. 3 other Grand Rounds to announce. One on November 4th. November 4th, we have a speaker from Canada, Carmen Logi, and she will be talking about intersectional stigma and impacts on HIV prevention and care cascades in different global contexts. And on November 18, we have David Holtgrave, and he will be talking about HIV and COVID public health responses, lessons learned from each other to inform the other, lessons learned from each to inform the other. And then on December 2nd, and that is of course close to World AIDS Day, we have a very special Grand Rounds. Avram Finkelstein will come and talk. He is a member of the collective that designed the Silence Equals Death symbol, and the preliminary title for that talk is AIDS, Art and Action. Then another meeting that I would like to announce will also take place in November. Oh, that went too fast. It's about fertility preservation in transgender men. It's part of the working group on gender meetings that are chaired by Heine Meyer-Balburg, November 12th. And if you are interested in that, of course, this goes way too fast to register now, but let us know by writing to either Stephen Zuckamaran or Tanya Reed that you're interested in participating, and then you'll get the information. Good. Then, as I said, we will have 2 speakers, and we will split that up in 2 sessions, 2 sections. So first Brian will talk, then we do Q&A, then Rogerio will talk and do Q&A. And I will introduce Brian first, and then later I will introduce Rogerio. Brian was a fellow with us from 2002 to 2005, one of the first fellows when the program was renewed. And after he left Columbia, his career followed a dazzling trajectory. I went over his CV, and I know Brian for a long time, but I was pleasantly impressed with all the things that he has been doing. And people who know Brian know that his special focus is on bisexuality. He has done much more than that. And when you look at his list of papers, it's primarily about sexual health promotion, but with a strong focus on bisexuality. At this moment, he is a tenured professor in the Department of Applied Health Science, at the School of Public Health Bloomington at Indiana University. I think it's important to mention that Brian played a very special role in the HIV Center. He made bisexuality from a theoretical construct that researchers used to talk about to a reality, and as a consequence, it became more real and more something that we could not ignore and have to work with. And I think the center is still indebted to Brian for that. The title of his talk is Bisexual Health, More Than a Phase, and it's a great honor, Brian, to have you here.
Thank you so much, Theo, for that introduction. And I really am thrilled to be back here at the HIV Center. I wish we could all be together in person, but hopefully those days are coming back soon. Meanwhile, it's great to be here with everyone on Zoom and to know that many of my fellow alumni, including Rogerio, are out there on the other side of the screen. I want to just quickly, in the sake of time, because I'm really here for Rogerio's talk, I want to quickly go through a presentation that I've cut down to about hopefully 20 minutes, an overview on bisexual health, which we're calling More Than a Phase. Theo and I came up with that name together. So first of all, we'll give a little bit of an overview of who and what bisexuality is and why it matters, and a couple of our ongoing research areas, and then just wrap up really briefly with where do we go from here with some recent and ongoing research. I do just want to acknowledge my partners in this. As you know, it's really not a singular process, and all of these people and many more have helped me to get to the point of where I am today. But I want to just quickly point out particularly Wendy Bostwick, who's at University of Illinois at Chicago School of Nursing, who I'll talk about some of our work together today. And then Theo Zonfort, who was the best postdoctoral mentor anyone could ever have, and who we continue to work together and write together. And it's really wonderful to continue the relationship that we started almost 20 years ago. I also just want to put a little plug out there for a book with some other colleagues that we guest edited, or co-edited, sorry, on LGBT health research. This just came out last year in Johns Hopkins University Press, and it's a really handy textbook for those of you who may be teaching related courses or working with graduate students. So, and that was spearheaded by Ron Stahl at Pitt and many other really wonderful colleagues too. So in terms of bisexual health, one complexity of studying bisexuality in particular is that it encompasses a broad range of behaviors, identities, and other factors. Data from our ongoing National Probability Survey, the National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior, show that about 3% of adult men and about 4% of adult women in the US self-identify as bisexual, as do about 1.5% of young men and almost 8%, or over 8% of 14 to 17-year-old young women. So we're really not talking about a small number here, and numbers recently came out from Pew and from other places that have shown that rates of bisexual self-identification only continue to rise. And our data also show that more women and men have engaged in sex with women and men. I'm just going to use women and men here, but we also ask about other genders in our survey, although those numbers tend to be much smaller in the general population. But those individuals are even more likely to identify as bisexual than cisgender men and women. And many more individuals of all genders have engaged in sex with people of multiple genders than identify as bisexual. In research on bisexual men and women has shown that there are significant health disparities among those who both engage in bisexual behavior or self-identify as bisexual. Most research, as you'll see here today, has focused on behaviorally bisexual men and self-identified bisexual women. Interestingly, we're trying to change that a little bit. Health disparities among bisexual individuals have shown consistent disparities across social and behavioral science research over the past several decades. Teo and I wrote a book chapter on this in 2006, I think. There were 4 studies that we outlined, and those have just only continued to grow and to show patterns that I'll mention in just a second about bisexual men and women existing in a web of syndemics in which such disparities interact in a chain reaction of negative health outcomes propelled by life adversity, stigma, discrimination, trauma, etc. So when compared to heterosexual or gay and lesbian individuals, when split out and looked at specifically, bisexual individuals tend to report higher rates of psychosocial health issues such as depression, anxiety, substance use, interpersonal violence, suicidality, health risk behaviors, unprotected sex work, higher number of sexual partners, frequent use of emergency contraception and pregnancy termination, and biomedical health issues, including disproportionate rates of HIV, sexually transmitted infections, as well as just overall lower scores on quality of life measures. And it's important to mention too, bisexual individuals score higher on measures of poverty, physical health problems, including disability, somatic complaints, sleep problems, all sorts of health related issues, intimate partner violence, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it really can be a bleak picture sometimes looking at these numbers, but what Wendy Bostwick and others, myself, have tried to do is to find out why. So first, I'll share some work with you. I think that relates to more specifically to the mission of the HIV Center, which was an HIV-focused study that we did on behaviorally bisexual men. Prior to this, there was really scant research on bisexual men's health and relationships, most focused on HIV risk, and even that was problematic because bisexual behavior was oftentimes collapsed in the category MSM, which invisibilizes bisexuality and only focuses on male partners. Bisexual identity oftentimes collapsed into gay and bisexual men, and bisexual men, again, not looked at individually. And bisexual relationships and lived experiences, there really wasn't a whole lot out there. So one of our goals was to conduct more focused research on the health concerns and lives of diverse groups of bisexual men, including but not limited to HIV risk. So this was the first R21 I had. We looked at understanding bisexual men's diverse range of sexual behaviors and experiences with partners of all gender, as well as event level context of those sexual behaviors. Participants responded to questions about the recency in sexual scenarios that based on our national probability survey measures. So we're able to compare these with the general population. And then they were given options about sexual behaviors within the past 30 days, the past 90 days, the past year, or more than a year ago. They could also indicate their sexual behaviors in condom use at last sexual event with male and female partners. So participants, we found, engaged in a wide range of sexual behaviors with men and women, especially vaginal intercourse and oral sex. So right away, we see that one of the most common behaviors among bisexual men, vaginal intercourse, is not typically captured in MSM-focused research or intervention work. So I think that's important to mention. There's more of this participant contextualizes it. There's more of a closeness with women, more of an understanding with men. I guess it depends on the man. I really can't group them together. I don't know how to answer it, except that I love women and I love men. And here, in terms of condom use and non-use, we found some, in the quotes on the side, contextualized. I won't read all of the text, but we found reasons for condom use were highest with women, again, for reasons of pregnancy prevention, which is not typically covered, again, in MSM-focused work. In condom use with bisexual, or with men, was for the purpose of HIV risk. And then a wide range of reasons for not using condoms: lack of perceived risk, male and female partners not wanting to use, trust, intimacy in relationships, alcohol and drug use, decrease in sexual pleasure and function, being caught in the moment and not having a condom available. And then this really interesting specific bisexuality related stigma and shame, which this participant explains: people being bisexual, we are really depressed because we don't belong to any group. We don't care too much about taking care of ourselves. And that I thought was very interesting and opened up all sorts of questions about why would that be? And I think particularly these were behaviorally bisexual men who had sex with at least one partner of more than one gender in the past 6 months. And I think that specific issue, while all the others are very relevant, is particular to bisexual people. And we've tried to probe that since then, in years since then, looking more into what are some of the reasons why. And I think our next study that I'll share with you gives a little bit more context on that. Sexual behaviors, relationships, and protective factors, some of the implications of this. Conducting more refinements, I think, of sexual behaviors, relationships, and protective behaviors among bisexual populations, including in the US general population, which we're doing right now. And another ongoing project I'll mention, the National Survey of Stigma and Sexual Health, examining targeted opportunities for sexual health promotion aimed at bisexual men, but also other health issues. So interestingly, if we shift gears here now and move from bisexual behavior to bisexual identity, we see that I do want to mention Wendy's research on women. Although I focus more on bisexual men, Wendy has simultaneously been focusing on bisexual women. And again, most research on bisexual women focuses on self-identified bisexual women and mental health, but you can see here very clear disparities in a paper that she did looking at mood disorders among bisexual, lesbian, and heterosexual women. So one of her first studies was looking at using e-diaries to assess the effects of microaggressions among bisexual women. And these were not only sexual orientation based, but also gender and race based microaggressions in a racially diverse sample of bisexual women, looking at their relationship with mental health and health behavior, identifying the characteristics of bisexual women's microaggression experiences, including their responses, and then identifying lifetime stressors that were associated with these. She collected data over 28 days using closed measures in a primarily African American and Latina sample, and also used extensive quantitative data from Chalou, which was Tonda Hughes's Chicago Health and Life Experiences of Women study. And she found just a little hint. These microaggressions, these commonplace slights, insults, and indignities associated with socially marginalized identities were common. One participant said, nobody's ever really said, get out. Some people have made comments, no one ever forced me, just a little hint, a little nudge, a little diss, a little attitude. They still do it, but I'm kind of tired of it. I'm too old for it. It's more than just comments that make you feel less comfortable talking freely and less comfortable being with who you are or divulging details. So we use this as a launching pad for another exploratory study that we've just wrapped up, looking at bisexual men's, self-identified bisexual men's daily experiences, the context, content, and source-related characteristics of a diverse sample of bisexual men, looking at their microaggression experiences, looking at the frequency and source with both sexual identity and racial microaggressions, and how these relate to physical and mental health, and assessing lifetime stressors that may influence associations between microaggressions and lifetime physical and mental health. So I'm just going to share a little data from the qualitative arm. We did 31 interviews before we launched into collecting daily diary data from 130 50 bisexual men. So we've got a lot of daily diary data that we're just starting to crack into. And any of you who have done daily diary data studies know there is indeed a lot of data. Eligibility criteria were that men identify as bisexual, as a man, cisgender, or transgender, 18 and older, lived in the Chicago area, and were English and or Spanish speaking. So for the interview phase, we had 19 to 61-year-olds, 14 Black, 8 Latino, 5 multiracial, 1 Asian, and 3 white, 24 cisgender, 7 transgender, 1 interview conducted in Spanish. And what we found was bisexual men reported a wide range of microaggressions, including those based on their race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual identity, and the intersections of these identities. I'll show you some quotes for the microaggressions based on their bisexual identity. These come from many sources, including family, friends, coworkers, helping professionals, romantic partners, and members of lesbian and gay communities. We also found indirect and internalized microaggressions. But as you see here, this with microaggressions from family members, and then I told my mom, she was kind of like, she's like, okay, but I understand, but I was like, maybe you're just confused. She was like, don't be dead set on this because like life changes and you just never know how you're going to feel. Just kind of telling me that I'm confused and that it might be a phase. I'll show you how these break down into sort of thematic areas in just a minute, but this is a vivid example, I think, from a 19-year-old biracial, cisgender, bisexual man. In terms of romantic sexual partners, I don't tell women that I'm bi. I did this once. She was by herself early on in the relationship. She said something slightly disparaging about bisexual men, like how perverted, slutty, and so forth and so on, promiscuous. I'm just like, okay, from a 45 Latino cisgender man. Teo, you might recognize that, not telling female partners is a theme that we found, throughout across different samples of bisexual men, going back to the work that I've done with the HIV Center. And then gay and lesbian community, we go out to the gay bars and always talk to people. This is more towards the past. I'm saying, oh, sweetie, don't you know? And you're just confused and, oh, that's an easy way, or you probably just came out and you don't know. It's always been there, that where just to avoid the conversation, I'm just like, oh yeah, I'm gay, whatever. So again, being invisibilized within gay and lesbian community settings. So here we've broken out these themes. We're just starting to write these data up. So hopefully soon I'll have a reference to give to you. But we had more sort of generalized bi negativity, comments that convey dislike or not taking bi people seriously, are more general and may not be directed specifically at the participant. You can see a quote there that illuminates that. Actually gay, comments that suggest that bisexual men are not really bisexual, they're actually gay. Assumptions of infidelity, comments or attitudes that bisexual men are more likely to cheat on their sexual partners. Denial or dismissal, comments that deny the existence of bisexuality, suggesting that the person is in denial or rejection of their labeling. And that, again, it's just a phase. Statements that bisexuality is just a phase, transitory, not stable or permanent identity. Picking a side, being admonished by others that bisexual men should choose a monosexual identity. Promiscuity, statements that bisexual men are hypersexual and discriminatory. Sleeping with many people includes being greedy, having your cake and eating it too, anything that moves. Bisexuality being unintelligible, comments and expressions of confusion from others about bisexuality, lack of understanding about how bisexuality or non-monosexual identities can actually exist. One of my favorite quotes, if I'm bisexual, it's like, what the hell is that? I think we've consistently heard that from participants across many studies over the years as well. And I think that encapsulates a lot right there, just not being able to understand it. And then you're confused. Statements that bisexual people are just confused about their identity and sexuality. So, giving a brief overview of research that we've done with both behaviorally and self-identified bisexual individuals, where do we go from here? Right now, Mark Katzenbuehler, who's now at Harvard University, and I have an ongoing stigma study focusing on structural stigma using our national survey of stigma and sexual health. We have about 150 bisexual men in this sample of 500 gay and bisexual men. And we're able to look across 5 waves of data collection. It's a general population probability sample at not only their sexual behaviors, but a wide range of other issues. Our colleague Brian Feinstein just put out a paper from this data looking at partner gender and its impact on a number of different variables, including physical and mental health. My dear doctoral student, Deanna Williams, has a really fascinating study going on looking at the experiences of individuals who self-identify as both biracial, multiracial, and bisexual. Really fascinating. She's also, for her dissertation, looking at a subgroup of these individuals who are over the age of 50 years old. Just a lot going on there in terms of intersections and commonalities, as well as interesting divergences in terms of identity. And then we had a special section of Archives of Sexual Behavior, which came out just now in 2019, focusing on bisexual health research. Wendy Bostwick and I guest edited that. And then last but not least, thank goodness, before the COVID pandemic hit, we had a watershed moment for bisexual health research, sponsored by the National Institutes of Health. We had a workshop on bisexual health research. Wendy and I co-chaired that, hosted by the Sexual and Gender Minority Research Office, as well as several other individual institutes. We focused on identifying research opportunities across thematic areas, including life course perspectives, intersecting populations, key health inequalities, and social determinants of bisexual health. And if you want to stream an entire 6.5-hour meeting, it's available on the SGMRO website. So that said, hopefully I've gone through this in the time that I was allotted, but I'm happy now to turn it back over to Teo, and thank you all so much for being here today with me and hearing a little bit more about our work.
Thank you so much, Brian. Brian, when can we expect the RFA?
Well, the conference, that was one of our main goals, was to get an RFA out, focused specifically on bisexual health. COVID threw a little bit of a wrench into that, but we do have a report out from the workshop, and I think that's a good starting point. And we've also been using just the broader sexual and gender minority health RFA or PA in the meantime.
Thank you. Okay, well, this, Brian, I said it when I introduced you, but it's amazing how you have been able to really develop this research program around bisexuality. And as I said earlier, that's not the only thing you're doing, but this is, this is very special. So congratulations for that.
Thank you.
It's open for questions. If people have questions, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand. I'm not sure, Stephen, if you can see that, if that happens. You can.
Yeah. As I mentioned in the chat, you can either use the Q&A or raise hand feature. It looks like Brian Kuttner has a question. Brian writes, your diary study sparked a thought about using the diary study as the basis for developing measures of stigma against sexual behaviors or identity. Is that something you've done or considered, or do you have considerations to share for that kind of approach?
I think it's something that we're very interested in doing, and we did include measures of each of those in the daily diary study. So stay tuned. We're just starting to crack into the daily diary data, and there's so much there. And the first couple papers that we're trying to get out are based around the aims of the study, but that's something that we'd like to do, I think, as soon as we're able.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Ivan has a question. Let me. Ivan, you're free to talk.
Thank you. Hi, Brian, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. It's wonderful to see your work evolve and get so nuanced over the years.
Thank you.
For me, listening to this was a little bit of a bummer. You know, we hear, you know, anecdotally and kind of in the general population about greater acceptance of different, you know, sexual minority groups. So I was a little struck just to see the same themes still happening. You know, for you that have studied this population over years, is there any optimism, or what positive changes have you seen in the acceptability of bisexual individuals, you know, over that time?
Thank you for that question, Ivan. And actually, I do have an answer. And Teo was involved in that too. We did a national probability survey of attitudes toward bisexual individuals in the general population of the United States. A couple years back, it was only the second to be done, and the first by Gregory Herrick included only heterosexual individuals. So we also had gay and lesbian individuals, other identified individuals, and including, you know, queer, pansexual, etc. And then we also asked bisexual individuals about their perceptions of other people's attitudes toward bisexuality. And what we found was that comparison to Gregory Herrick's study, where attitudes toward bisexual individuals were more negative than toward any other social group except injecting drug users, and that was in the mid-90s. In our survey, there was a swing, but it's only a bit toward the middle. The majority of individuals across the 5 items that we assessed attitudes with were more likely to report neither agreeing nor disagreeing with the statements about bisexual men and women. And we asked separately about men and women. Attitudes were more positive toward bisexual women. Attitudes toward bisexual individuals were most positive among individuals who identified as other, followed by gay and lesbian, followed by heterosexual. Attitudes toward bisexual individuals just in general were more positive among women than among men. So we found some of these, you know, more detailed results within the data, but there is a shift. It's not, you know, the most promising shift. I mean, that people tend to be more ambivalent now than negative. But I think we are seeing the needle moving a bit, and I think I'm hoping to do another wave of data collection, even with now, as in comparison to a few years ago, just with recent examples that we've seen in the media and in other spaces about depictions of bisexuality. I think it is becoming slowly more accepted, but unfortunately, just not as quickly as we would like.
And
Thank
Brian, if I may add to that, I think the other thing that you made clear is that bisexual people as a group experience much more stigma than, for instance, gay and lesbian people do, and it has a more negative impact on their health compared to gay and lesbian people. So, and that is something that only, say, in the past 10, 15 years is really getting clear.
Yeah.
And also the earlier studies that were done where straight and gay people were compared, those included the bisexual people, but they were always mixed, and you're aware of that, mixed with the gay man. And as a consequence, you might think that these original disparities, for a large part, were caused by the bisexual group.
Yeah.
But it was not visible.
Yeah. So we have greater visibility now, but we still have a lot of work to do.
We have a question, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, from Sitsi Masvarore. They ask, I may have missed this, but how much international research are you doing on this topic? And what are some field highlights internationally? And Rogerio tagged on saying, and how about places outside the United States where people have sex with people of their own gender identity, but who nonetheless still identify as heterosexual?
Very good questions. And I've been fortunate to have done a number of studies within the context of India, looking at bisexual men, and through my former doctoral student, Jessamine Bowling, looking at bisexual and sexual minority women in India. And I think context matters. These issues are very different outside the United States in terms of how bisexuality is experienced or expressed or not. Is very specific to different cultural settings, and the work that I've shown here today is very much US based, and I think we need more room for those international studies and more resources to conduct them. I know the work Teo has been doing in South Africa, Rogerio, you know about Brazil. These cultural settings, you know, there's so much bisexuality, but it's not necessarily called that. And I think it's really important to capture that in just the work that we've been doing in India, where there actually isn't a word in most local languages for bisexual, but there's so much bisexuality happening is really fascinating. And I'd love to do more research in international settings also.
We have a comment from Heino. As there is ample evidence that sexual orientation depends to quite an extent on the effects of early sex steroids on the brain or variations of steroid receptor sensitivity, bisexuality must exist. That is, not only extreme outcomes such as hetero or homosexuality.
Yes. Amen.
If there are any other questions, feel free to enter in the chat or raise your hand.
And if not,
yeah,
then Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think the last comment indicates your impact of the HIV Center. So that's really wonderful. And I remember you starting and not being very impressed with the acceptance of bisexuality in the HIV Center, and things have changed. So thanks to you.
I can see that, and thank you. Also, thanks to you, Teo.